everybody. Very welcome to Shebeen. Gary Chandler. If you've never joined us before, you're in the right craic, chat, and Irish Whiskey community. Sounds gone there. We're back. Okay. So, fix my audio. Yes. Two tabs open. There's always something. Full-time audio here. You're welcome to the Shebeen. I'm talking to Paddy Irish Whiskey tonight. Amazing story and fascinating background to a iconic brand, Paddy Irish Whiskey brand. Here in a lot tonight. We're going to be diving into its unbelievable past, unbelievable present, and hopefully an unbelievable future. It's a story, a roller coaster ride story that goes on and on for a couple hundred years. So we'll talk all about it. We'll talk all about it tonight. Okay, let me see. Bad sounds again. Let me see. It's my audio. We are going to be in big trouble here. Again, are we? We're in a word. All right, give me 1 second. All right. Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. We're going to throw out all of our microphones into the bin. Okay, that should be better now. Thanks for all your audio feedback. We have tried everything to reset this. Different microphones, different cables, different browsers, different mics, cables, you name it, everything. And we think it's a software issue on our service that we use more than anything else, so that's a big problem for us. But what can we do? We'll keep going. We'll keep trying. So I'm going to go off all the microphones here. I'm just going to stick on what comes through the computer. So hopefully you can hear me okay. It won't be as crisp or as nice as it normally is, but anyway, as long as you can hear me, that's all that matters. So tonight we're going to dive into Paddy Irish Whiskey, and we're not going to worry about the sound. We're going to worry about the whiskey and not the sound. Paddy is our focus, an incredible history, hundreds of years of history, past, present, and hopefully a future for the brand as well. We've got 3 different versions of Paddy that I'll be talking about as we tell the story tonight. So lots to get into, lots to cover in our world of Irish whiskey. Everyone's saying the sound is great now. Amazing. We're going to stick with just the computer sound and not have any microphones going forward. There's so many different bits at play here between software on the camera, software on the computer, software in the mics. I don't know. You can always ask for your money back, I suppose, on the ticket price, and I'd happily give it back to you. So Sláinte, what's in your glass? Tell me what you're drinking tonight. I'm finishing off a drop of Napo Castle 23-year-old single malt port cask that we had at our Napo tasting not so long ago. That's in my glass. I'll be moving on to Paddy blend, going from a 23-year-old pot still, 23-year-old single malt to a 4 to 6-year-old blend now shortly. But them's the breaks. Where's the Paddy apple, says Chris. Sure, that's not whiskey at all, Chris. We only have whiskey here. We don't have flavoured drinks. Where are you joining us from? You're joining us from all over. We've got, let me see, we've got Arizona in the house. We've got Cork in the house, Los Angeles, Indiana. Where else have we got? Yeah, lots of Columbus, Ohio. We got Florida in the house. We've got Massachusetts. Lots of folks with great pints and whiskies going. Ninth Wave Gin. Dunville's 21-year-old for Brian Redden. Pensacola, Florida in the house. We've got Chicago in the house. North Dakota in the house. Jason's got Paddy in Indiana. Amazing. All right, so let's talk about tonight. We're talking about Sligo. We're talking about Sips. We're talking about Sazerac. If anyone's been to Sligo, let me know. If any Americans have been to Sligo, those of you from Ireland, I hope have been to Sligo at some point in your life. I haven't been to Sligo in, I would say, 25 years or 23 or 24 years maybe. It's a bit off the path now from Cork. You'd have to have a specific reason to get to Sligo. But we'll be talking all about it tonight because it plays a big role in the story of Paddy. We'll talk about Sazerac, which plays a big role in the story of Paddy as well. But before we dive into that, we've got other things to talk about. I want to share with you some of the new whiskies that have come across our desk and some of the things that are making their way to the United States at the moment. Those of you who are joining us from Ireland, you may have easier access to some of these, others you may not. But I want to share what's new in the world of Irish whiskey. First off came this surprise announcement during the week from Redbreast, which is a new 19-year-old Redbreast, which was released exclusively through the Whiskey Exchange, which is a very well-known, very high-end whiskey shop in London. There's a couple of them in London. And the Whiskey Exchange has been known for some incredible collaborations with Midleton over the years. Some of the best whiskies I've ever tasted have been the Whiskey Exchange picks from Midleton Distillery. Things like a 26-year-old Green Spot, Whiskey Exchange exclusive, 30-year-old Redbreast, all port Whiskey Exchange exclusive. And now we've got this 19-year-old single pot still, £250 or $320, which is aged in second fill Oloroso sherry casks. What's interesting about this one is that it doesn't seem to be a single cask, hence why it doesn't have that purple box. It's got that light blue box, which many of you will be familiar with in the United States from the small batch Redbreast. But also it's not a single cask, but also it's not aged in, from what we can tell, in first fill Oloroso or bourbon. It seems to be an entire maturation in second fill Oloroso sherry. So second fill meaning these casks, these Oloroso sherry casks have been used a second time. They've had Irish whiskey in them before. They were dumped. They're used a second time for now refilling for 19 years or 20 years, 19 years minimum with the single pot still. So no more details on that at the moment, but if we do get a sample of it, we'll certainly share our feedback with you. So that's only available in the Whiskey Exchange. It can be challenging to get that, but if you're going to London or you know somebody going to London who may be able to pick it up for you, there is a Redbreast 19-year-old if that's your cup of tea. Next up, I want to talk about very quickly Green Spot Quail's Gate. It was announced a few months ago as a new addition to the Green Spot lineup. It has been widely available in Europe, but it's only now making its way across the United States. It landed in Ohio last week, limited quantities wherever it's landing. It is a permanent edition, but it's in limited quantities, if that makes sense. So smaller quantities than Leavel Barton and the Chateau Montelena. So this may not be as available. So if you like Green Spot and you want to try a Green Spot that's been finished in Pinot Noir casks from Quail's Gate Winery in Canada, this could be your jam, $99 plus, and it's making its way across the United States currently. And then the next one up, I want to talk very briefly about the Method and Madness Gariana. This is a whiskey that has been getting some attention in our group, and there's been questions about its availability in the United States. So it's the latest release from Method and Madness. We've talked about it a couple of times on the show and in our Facebook community. To me, it's the best $100, $120 Method and Madness that's ever been released. It is a finished in virgin Gariana oak casks, and Gariana oak comes from the Pacific Northwest, virgin oak meaning it's never been used before, and so it's gone through a finishing period in these Gariana oak casks. So this is a whiskey that has come from this is, if I remember correctly, I'm trying to think of all the ones we tasted recently, but this is from the Micro Distillery. This is a single pot still from the Micro Distillery in Midleton, whereas previous Method and Madness haven't all been from the Micro Distillery. Some of them have been from the main plant, the main distillery, but this is from the Micro Distillery. Arrives in the US in late September. So I was speaking to the team in the US about this, and we're going to try and get you some samples of it when it arrives in the United States so that you can try it. It's not a guaranteed thing, but we're working on seeing if the logistics can work. There's limited quantities of this, but I'd like to do a tasting of Method and Madness with our whiskey club. So stay tuned. As it gets closer to September, we'll have a better sense of that. But the request has been put in. I'd like to do a tasting with Method and Madness for you, so you get to try this and get to try a few other whiskies. So I'll keep you posted on that, and we'll see how we go. All right, those are the three whiskies. There's coming up, I know there's a lot of whiskies coming and going, and some go beneath the radar and some get mentioned and some don't. But The next whiskey that I know of being released is from Boan Distillery in Drogheda, and they are releasing a summer solstice single pot still this Wednesday, and I'll share more details of that when I have it as well. Amy wants to find this when she's in Ireland. You should be able to find that at the distillery, Amy, in Middleton. Should be easy enough to find. And Paul says, best method of madness for the money by far. Yeah, agreed. It's my bottle's almost gone. It's a cracking whiskey, really is. Amy loves Sligo. All right. Let's talk very briefly about our Dunville's single cask, which we're almost at the line with. So labels are in hand. It's being labeled on Wednesday and then shipped, ready for shipping immediately thereafter. So tomorrow I'll be finalizing the details of all the allocations and the links. So hopefully by Wednesday you'll have an email with links if you are one of the lucky few to reserve a bottle or two of the Dunville single cask for Stories and Sips, 19 years old, single malt, aged in bourbon barrels and finished for 6 years in Oloroso sherry cask. Fantastic whiskey, 222 bottles, fully reserved. Everyone who requested got at least one bottle allocated, and some of you will have gotten 2 bottles allocated. And then we'll see how things shake up. If people don't order the bottles they were allocated, we might have some more available. But that's going. Your links for purchase will go out this week, all going to plan. If that changes, I'll let you know. And also, once those orders are placed, we'll be doing a drawing for some prizes from Dunville. So thanks to the team at Dunville's for giving us a bottle of the best Irish whiskey, the voted best Irish whiskey single malt Palo Cortado finish, which was Irish Whiskey of the Year in 2022. They've given us a number of kits of samples of Dunville's and Ecklenville spirits for us to try as well. And I think we've probably got maybe 7 or 8 different prizes that we're going to draw for those of you who are quick to make your purchase in the first 24 hours once the links go out. So I'll keep you posted on that. So looking forward to drawing the names randomly on that as well. Upcoming tastings in our whiskey club. For those of you who are members of the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, we're working on some various quarterly tastings to get some samples to you to be able to try whiskeys that you haven't tried before. We've also got, well, first of all, excuse me, we're working on a blind tasting. I announced that during the week. We're going to get a blind tasting to you hopefully in the next 6 weeks. We'll be able to do that. And it's a blind tasting with a difference where the distillery will be known, but the whiskeys will not. And it's an interesting one for a number of reasons. So looking forward to sharing that with you. We're working on tastings with various distilleries at the moment that we hope to get to you like the second half of this year. So from now to the end of the year, it's going to come hard and fast. We've got a lot of things lining up and a lot of things are falling into place kind of the second half of the year. Connacht Distillery in Mayo. We're going to do a tasting with Connacht. We're going to do a tasting with Teeling. We're going to do a tasting with Waterford. So lots coming. So stay tuned on our upcoming tastings. We've also got a Meet the Maker event coming up on June 30th with Tim Hurley, who is the co-founder of Lost Irish Whiskey. Tim is a former Tullamore Dew brand ambassador and trainer and manager of the brand teams in the United States. So Tim, also co-author of the book From Barley to Blarney, Blarney to Barley, whichever way it's spelt or phrased. The book From the Dead Rabbit. Tim was one of the partners and one of the co-authors on that. And Tim's going to join us for a chat about founding a whiskey company, founding Lost Irish, talk about his whiskey, and we'll do a little taste of it as well and share with you kind of the plans for the brand in the United States. We've also got a lot coming up in the next few months on the Meet the Maker side of things. June is that Meet the Maker on June 30th with Tim Hurley from Lost Irish. In July, we are going to meet Michael O'Boyle, who is the owner of Waylock Distillery, Ireland's smallest distillery, and that's in Donegal. We're also going to get a tour of the distillery, which will take all of 7 seconds as he swivels on his chair and holds the camera. As he swivels, you'll get the entire distillery in one swivel of the chair. But it's going to be a great chat because Michael's doing interesting things with oats and potatoes and wheat and barley and poutine and different spirits that are not poutine or whiskey. But he's also working on whiskey as well. So we're going to meet Michael O'Boyle in July. And then in August, you're going to meet a whole family. You're going to meet 3 family members from Lough Gill Distillery, a real family business, new distillery. The Clancy family doing interesting things, have sourced interesting whiskies up to now. They're right on the banks of the River Shannon in County Longford, and I'm looking forward to sharing their story and for them to share what they're working on with you. And that's in August, and we'll share what's happening in September, October, November, December as we have them. So those are the upcoming Meet the Maker events. If you're not yet a member of our club, we'd love to have you. We've got lots of tastings, lots of exclusive releases coming. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 Whiskey Club bottlings in the pipeline after Dunville's. 4 Whiskey Club bottlings in the pipeline, each of them unique, each of them special, each of them different, each of them exclusive to the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, can't be found anywhere else in the world. And we may get all 4 of those out before the end of the year. You never know. If not all 4, certainly 3 of them. So lots coming up there. We'd love to have you join if you're not yet a member. It's $20 a month to be a member, and you can cancel your membership anytime or stay for as long as you like, and you can join from anywhere in the world. There's the details on the screen, storiesandsips.com/club. Right, that's it. No more pitching-y. Just wanted to get you up to date on everything that's happening there and the world of our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. Oh, yes, and then next week we're going to have a very special Shebeen. I'm going to give you a hint, but I'm not going to tell you all the details later on in the show today. But next Friday, we're going to be on location for a Shebeen, and I'm going to share with you at the end where we're going to be on location, and that's as much as I'll share with you. So stay tuned. It's going to be a really special one next week. It's going to require me to do a bit of driving, but it's going to be worth it. Stay tuned. Kevin asks if the registration for June 30th Meet the Maker has gone out yet. No, it hasn't. It's going out this week. All right, so let's talk about Paddy. Let's talk about our wonderful story of amalgamation, a story of survival. We're at a stage in Irish whiskey where history is starting to repeat itself. And we're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to tell you and share with you some remarkable stories of people and places and decisions made over the years. The story of Paddy is the most roller coaster ride in Irish whiskey history, I think, and it has been going on since the late 1700s, early 1800s, all the way to today in various forms, and hopefully it continues for a long, long time to come. So we're going to talk about that tonight. Paddy was one of the 3 or 4 Irish whiskies you had in your house in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. I remember growing up in a house that was a Powers house. Other houses were Jameson houses. Other houses were Bushmills houses, or other houses again were Paddy houses. Those were kind of the 4 blends that really occupied a bit of space in almost every house in Ireland. You either had a bottle of Paddy, a bottle of Powers, a bottle of Jameson, or a bottle of Bushmills. And what you had mostly depended on what your father drank before you, or what his father drank before him. And Tullamore Dew didn't seem to make much of an appearance, because that was mostly for export at the time. And so these 4 blends were the ones you kind of had in your house. Paddy is a Cork whiskey through and always has been. When you think about Jameson, you think about Powers, they're made in Cork today, but they are Dublin brands that came to Cork. Paddy is a Cork brand, born in Cork, made in Cork. It's still made in Cork today, will be made in Cork for a while yet. And so there's a certain pride around Cork for Paddy. You walk around the city of Cork, you'll see some pubs with old stained glass with the old Paddy logo, or the old block lettering of Paddy in the window. You'll see old Paddy signs, vertical metal signs that have a picture of the old Paddy bottle on them that would be as tall as 5 or 6 feet tall. It would have been hung on the side of a pub. So Paddy is a recognised brand in Cork, and a much loved brand in Cork as well. But it's been through the ringer over the years, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. But I'm going to pour a drop of Paddy Original here to get started. All of you have access to Paddy, I suspect, in the United States, but you might not see it as this label or this bottle, because when over the last few years, Paddy has been rebranded in the United States to Paddy's 'S, and it's been given a bit of a cartoon Hollywood look. picture of a kind of an animated character on the front that's supposed to be the man Paddy himself with a little shamrock in his lapel, and it's a bit much, honestly. But you'll know it as Paddy's, and look, you can get this for as little as $18 or $20 a bottle in the United States. It's a blended whiskey. It's a blend of all three styles of Irish whiskey: pot still whiskey, malt whiskey, grain whiskey, in various quantities in here. You're going to have a high percentage of grain whiskey in here, there's no doubt about it. But pot still and malt in here as well. Triple distilled, has been made in the Middleton Distillery for the past 100+ years, and will continue to be made there for a few years more. It's a light whiskey. It's an inoffensive whiskey. It's something that you just couldn't turn it down if you're offered it, because it's not a bad whiskey. But it's not going to blow your mind, but it'll get the job done, if you know what I mean. Screw top, says Jeff. Awesome. That's right. The old screw tops. In fact, the two Paddies I've got here today are both screw tops. All our whiskies growing up were screw tops. The old Cork was a more recent addition. But look, Paddy's going to be you're going to get a lot of raw notes on this. It's not going to be the most balanced whiskey you as a whiskey lover have ever tried in your life, but it doesn't have to be. Not for $20 a bottle. You're going to get a lot of kind of pear notes on the nose, little hint of caramel, little hint of malt. But this is a whiskey that will get the job done rather than set your world on fire. But the story to go with the whiskey makes the whiskey taste even better. So a little Sláinte. Cheers. It's sweet, it's light, it's short. But for $20 a bottle, you wouldn't expect any more. And I always have a Paddy of some sort in the house. I had to go out and get this Paddy now today, but there'll always be some sort of Paddy in the house here. We're going to talk a little bit more about it in a second. But if you have a drop of Paddy or Paddies to hand, if you have Paddies, it'll be the same whiskey. It's just relabeled, rebadged, repackaged, rebranded for the United States. The Irish version has stayed the same here. You might also notice if you have a bottle of Paddies, it says bottled in Kentucky, and that's perfectly legal. Irish whiskey can leave the United States, can leave Ireland and be bottled elsewhere, so long as it leaves Ireland in inert containers, so stainless steel or international bulk containers, shipping containers, plastic containers. It can be bottled anywhere that has what's called a GI, geographical indicator, over the bottling line that's been approved, so you can bottle Irish whiskey anywhere. So Paddy for the United States is bottled by Sazerac in Kentucky, of all places. $17.99 where Kevin is in Texas, $27 where Rich is. And Jason found it for $20 in Indiana. David, shocked that there's no Cork in the Cork whiskey. It's a fact. Paul says he'd love a US bottle for his shelf. So maybe if anyone's coming over on the whiskey bus and they want to bring a bottle of Paddy's for Paul, he'll pick it up in Cork. I might have a bottle, so I don't have a bottle here. All right, so let's get on with this. So Paddy is a story that starts with Cork Distilleries Company. So I talked about this being a story of amalgamation, a story of survival, and Paddy really personifies this. Paddy is a product of the original Cork Distilleries Company. Cork Distilleries Company itself, an amalgamation of 4 different distilleries in 1867 in Cork. Green's Distillery, North Mal Distillery, Daly's Distillery, and the Watercourse Road Distillery. They all merged together in 1867. They were joined later by a 5th distillery, the famous Middleton Distillery, ended up being the last standing in the Cork Distilleries Company when all of the other 4 distilleries closed. But the Cork Distilleries Company had this very popular whiskey. This popular whiskey was called the Cork Distilleries Company Map of Ireland Old Irish Whiskey. Bit of a mouthful. But this was a pot still whiskey, aged typically for about 7 years. It would say it on the bottle. And you'll see these signs in various antique shops. You'll see them in bars. You'll see them reproduced in kind of reproduction shops that sell bar paraphernalia. But the Cork Distilleries Company was the powerhouse of distilling in the south of Ireland for many, many years, all the way up until 1966. And we'll talk about what happened in 1966. But Patrick J. O'Flaherty is the man we're focused on tonight. And he was a salesman for the Cork Distilleries Company. He joined the company in the late 1870s, early 1880s. And for 30 odd years, almost 40 years, he worked for the Cork Distilleries Company. Now, he was a legend in his own right. He was the original brand ambassador. He was the man who would go into bars and pour drops of the Cork Distilleries Company Map of Ireland Old Irish Whiskey. It's called Map of Ireland Old Irish Whiskey because it had on the front of every bottle a map of Ireland. Still does today. You'll see it here. And Paddy would go from the southwest of Ireland to the southeast of Ireland, horse and cart and train, and he would introduce people to the Cork Distilleries Company whiskey. And he was known as a generous man. He was known for having a large expense account, even though he wasn't permitted to have such a large expense account. And when somebody knew that Paddy was coming to town, he was practically carried off the train and brought to the local pub, because everybody knew that once you got Paddy inside the door, he was going to buy drinks for everybody, and everyone's going to taste and enjoy some of the Cork Distilleries Company's whiskey. Paddy was so revered and so well known and so prolific in the bars around the south of Ireland, around Cork and further afield, that the Cork Distilleries Company Map of Ireland Old Irish Whiskey, that kind of name, which was a bit of a mouthful, started to be replaced by the bar owners, who would write notes to the Cork Distilleries Company in their headquarters in Morrison's Island, where the Murphy family lived, the owners of Cork Distilleries Company. And they would write and they would ask for to place an order, and they would ask for cases of Paddy's whiskey, because it became known as Paddy's whiskey because he was the one out there every day and every week pouring drops of whiskey for everybody. And when he did, he certainly earned his money, because the bar owners it became known as Paddy's whiskey. And so when Paddy eventually retired in 1912, 1913, the Cork Distilleries Company recognized the impact he'd had, and no more was anybody calling their whiskey the Cork Distilleries Company Map of Ireland Old Irish Whiskey. Instead, everybody was already calling it Paddy's whiskey or Paddy. And so they asked Paddy if he wouldn't mind lending his name to the whiskey, and in his honor, could they rename the whiskey? And he was paid a continuing salary when he retired. So he retired in 1912, 1913, and he was paid a salary right up until his death for the use of his name. And so started the story of the name Paddy Irish Whiskey. And so it all started with Patrick J. O'Flaherty. Now, it has stayed the same in terms of the name, apart from the Paddies for the United States. But the story of Paddy is one that's told often. And a few years ago, I had a chance to visit in Cork Paddy O'Flaherty's grave and recount some of the stories that I'd heard and had been shared with me. And I have a short little video here I want to play for you at Paddy's grave to share some of the stories and some of the ironies of how he ended up where he ended up. And I'll just play it here, and you can see for yourself.
I'm in St. Joseph's Cemetery in Turner's Cross in Cork at the grave of a whiskey legend, Mr. Paddy Flaherty, Patrick O'Flaherty, for whom Paddy Irish Whiskey is named. And Paddy was famous, of course, for introducing thousands of Corkonians and people around Ireland to the joys of Irish whiskey. He was a salesman for the Cork Distilleries Company, which eventually became Irish Distillers, of course. But back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Paddy would have gone all over the country, travelling by train to buy whiskey for locals and drinkers in bars, introducing them to the Cork Distilleries Company's whiskey. So popular was the whiskey that the bar owners would write letters to the distillery asking for cases of Paddy's whiskey. So when Paddy retired, Cork Distilleries Company, of course, asked him could they use his name in every bottle. And since the 1920s, we've had Paddy emblazoned across every bottle of Paddy Irish Whiskey, and I have a small little measure of it here. And what's interesting, particularly about this graveyard, is the cemetery, is that this was the first Catholic graveyards in Cork, and it was land purchased by a Father Matthew, a priest. And Father Matthew was famous for the temperance movement. He railed against the abuse of alcohol and the consequences and the impact of alcohol addiction. And so he was very successful in weaning people off alcohol, to the point where he reduced excise duty on alcohol in terms of the take that the government made by about 50% at one time in the mid 1800s. Father Matthew died in 1856, having converted many people away from alcohol. And the great irony, of course, is that we're here in Father Matthew's graveyard. Paddy O'Flaherty, the great whiskey salesman, is buried here, and right over the wall here, Father Matthew is buried. So you have the king of temperance and the king of whiskey side by side in the graveyard. An irony that could only maybe happen in Cork. And so I'm delighted to see that, to see his grave, to know where he was buried. He's had such a profound influence on Irish whiskey, and it's nice that it's nice to know where his final resting place was. And so I think a little toast here now, Paddy Irish Whiskey, to toast Paddy, late of Cork Distillers. We have a small little sip for Paddy. Cheers, Paddy.
I had less grey hair then. That's in Turner's Cross in the city centre in Cork, just outside the city centre in Cork. And if you ever want to go visit the grave, you can go to St. Joseph's Cemetery and see Father Matthew's grave, and indeed Paddy Flaherty's grave there. To give you some sense of the whiskies, the whiskey bottles, I'm going to show you some pictures here. So I'll put this up more full screen. Here's two old advertisements for the same whiskey, and you'll notice the spelling without the E. Cork Distilleries Company Limited. On the left it says Paddy Flaherty Whiskey, and it hadn't yet been, the name Paddy wasn't yet emblazoned on it. So this could go all the way back to I would say 1920s, 1930s. They used his name from 1913 onwards, but it wasn't until a bit later that the name Paddy was emblazoned, or kind of became a more prominent feature than the words Cork Distilleries Company. But you look on the right hand side, Cork Distilleries Company, you see no mention of Paddy there at all, but just guaranteed 7 years old, pure pot still whiskey. And there's no E in Paddy. There never was until 1966. And in 1966, with the amalgamation of Jameson and Powers and the Midleton Distillery / Cork Distilleries Company, there was a standardization applied across the board, so that all of the whiskies that were produced in the Midleton Distillery would all be spelled with an E. And Paddy so changed its spelling. It was the only one that was spelled without the E. More amalgamation then in 1966. This is a photo I found on the Irish Distillers website, and I'm obsessed with this photograph because it is, I've been telling the story for a long time about the amalgamation in 1966 when Irish whiskey was on its knees. Cork Distilleries Company was down to one distillery from the 5 that it had. Its only distillery was this one here, Midleton in County Cork. Jameson and Powers in Dublin were operating a few weeks of the year. The rest of the year, their stills were mothballed. Bushmills in Northern Ireland wasn't part of the amalgamation, and wouldn't join Irish Distillers till 7 or 8 years later. But this photograph here shows the reasoning as to why Midleton was where all 3 distilleries amalgamated, and where it was decided that the future of Irish whiskey was to be based. And it's because of, if you look to the north of the picture, it's those green fields that you see there. Those green fields allowed the expansion of the old Midleton Distillery. There's no longer green fields there. In fact, you could extend that picture on for another 3 or 4 fields more, and there still wouldn't be fields in those places today, because that's where the new Midleton Distillery was built, in what are those fields at the back there. The old Midleton Distillery to the front, built in 1825, was expanded in 1973 to accommodate for the amalgamation of the three distilleries, Powers, Jameson, and Paddy/Cork Distilleries Company. And so the amalgamation happened in 1966. It took 7 years for the new distillery to be built. 1973 it opened, and that was the last. There wouldn't be many pictures like this where you'd ever see those green fields again. And even now, this year and next year, more fields around that area are going to disappear and be turned into distillery land and warehouse land with the expansion of Midleton yet again. But the greenfield presence allowed for the expansion of Midleton Distillery, and it allowed for there to be space to accommodate the production needs and the predicted or projected or aspirational needs of the newly formed company Irish Distillers going forward. Now, in that period between 1973 and 2013, there was very little happening in the world of Paddy. 40 years where the only thing that happened was Paddy went from being a pot still whiskey to being a blended whiskey. And that was a move that happened with Powers, it happened with Jameson as well, it happened with Tullamore Dew. And so the pot still whiskey that was considered not really suitable to the palate at the time disappeared and was replaced with a more favorable or lighter whiskey, a blended whiskey blended with grain, maize, and wheat in some cases, just to accommodate for a lighter palate, a more delicate palate perhaps at the time. But in 2013, we got a new Paddy, and everyone was very excited because it showed or got people really enthused and encouraged and hopeful that this was the sign of great things to come from the Paddy brand. So in 2013, a 100-year celebration or 100-year centenary, marking the 100 years since Paddy had been renamed and since Paddy Flaherty had retired. And so Irish Distillers released this one-off. I'm not sure how many bottles there were at the time. This was before I was into Irish whiskey, really. And they released a 7-year-old whiskey with the old label in honor of Paddy Flaherty in a lovely little presentation box. And it's a fabulous whiskey. If you see it at auction for 100, 150 euros, pick it up. That'd be great value. You're never going to see it again. It's a one-off, and I have a bottle of it here. I've been nursing it for a while. But it's a 7-year-old whiskey distilled in Midleton, triple distilled, pot still, and it's got such lovely notes of malt, of digestive biscuit is how I describe it, that's coated in chocolate, a chocolate-covered digestive biscuit. It's creamy, it's textured, it's a lovely, lovely whiskey. And it has the old labels at the bottom. You'll see them here where it says guaranteed 7 years old. It says the Paddy Flaherty whiskey. And in the corner there, it says only genuine when bottled by the Cork Distilleries Company. And it has the name James Murphy. And James Murphy was the owner of the Cork Distilleries Company. So a little throwback, bottled at 43%, inspired by the very same whiskey as enjoyed by Paddy himself. So it wouldn't be far off what Paddy would have enjoyed or what Paddy would have been selling around the streets, around the pubs, around the south of Ireland back in the day. I'm going to pour a drop of this for myself. It only comes up at auction now, but you see, sometimes you can get it anywhere from 100 euros to 200 euros a bottle. But if you see it for closer to 100, it's well worth picking up. It's a lovely, lovely whiskey. If anyone's ever tried it, let me know. Eric's tried it there. How are you, Eric? Eric's tried this. I tried to get 2 or 3 of them when I could, when I saw it cheaply. So I've got 1 or 2 in reserve. But it's just so nice to have a Paddy whiskey with a pot still Paddy whiskey, something that we haven't seen in 50 years, because in the 1960s that was phased out, and then there wasn't another pot still Paddy until 2013. Yeah, it's really great mouthfeel, thick, creamy, just dairy milk chocolate. Lovely, lovely whiskey. So that was the what we hoped was going to be the resurgence in Paddy, but alas, our hopes and our dreams were shattered when in 2016 we heard the shock news that Paddy was going to be offloaded by Irish Distillers, and the really the last surviving Cork Distilleries Company brand was going to be sold from the distillery that kept it going since the early 1920s. And that was a shock. It was a shock in the whiskey community. I think it's still looked at as a bit of a shock to this day. But from a brand perspective and a business perspective, I think it was deemed that Paddy as a blended whiskey was really a competitor within its own stable, competing with Jameson blend, competing with the Powers Gold label. And there's only so many marketing dollars to go around, and so many of the so much focus that can be put on a smaller selling brand. Now, I say smaller selling. At the time, it was the fourth best selling Irish whiskey in the world, but it was still only about 200,000 cases. Compare that now to what, 8 million cases of Jameson, I think, is that where we're at the moment? 8.5 million cases of Jameson, so 200,000 cases, but still fourth best selling Irish whiskey in the world. 2016, in comes the Americans to buy the brand. Sazerac, one of the largest drinks companies in the United States, turnover about $1 billion a year. They own 450 brands, including the likes of Buffalo Trace and Pappy Van Winkle. They came in recognizing the growth in Irish whiskey, and they snapped up the brand. Now, it didn't mean that it was leaving Cork. It meant that ownership was leaving Cork. Instead, ownership was now going to be transferred to the United States. But with the purchase in 2016 came a long-term supply agreement with the Midleton Distillery, ensuring that there was available distilling capacity to ensure supply of Paddy long after it was sold. So since 2016, Paddy has continuously been made at the Midleton Distillery exactly the same way that's always been made. Blend of malt and pot still and grain. The pot still and the grain come from Midleton. The malt whiskey comes from Bushmills as new make spirit and is aged in Midleton. So there's supply agreements back and forth between Bushmills and Midleton going back to the days of Irish distillers when they were all together under one roof. So grain whiskey goes up north to Bushmills, and malt whiskey comes down south from Bushmills to Midleton. Paul bought one last week for €120. The Paddy pot still, Paddy Centenary. Good find. Now, when Sazerac came and they bought the brand, they recognized the growth in Irish whiskey, but it wasn't their first Irish whiskey brand, because they were also the owners of the Michael Collins Irish whiskey brand. So Michael Collins is a brand that was started in 2006, and it itself came with a bit of controversy in many ways. Michael Collins brand, when it was first launched in 2006, met with a lot of resistance, especially in West Cork, the home of Michael Collins, famous patriot, famous freedom fighter, and there were a lot of politicians were a bit upset that Michael Collins' likeness was being used to sell whiskey. But his biographer, Tim Pat Coogan, said she wasn't he fond of the drop himself, and he'd be happy to think that he was moving a bit of it. Michael Collins' whiskey was started by an American man in 2006, but it was part of a $100 million lawsuit when Beam, again, this story the story of Paddy has so many rabbit holes. Beam, Suntory, one of the largest drinks companies in the world, they acquired the Cooley Distillery. And when they acquired the Cooley Distillery, they ceased the supply of third-party whiskey to many small partners. Many small whiskey brands could no longer get access to whiskey because Cooley wanted all of the whiskey for themselves. We suspect because they wanted to send it out to Japan and blend it with the high-demand Japanese whiskies and make them go a little bit further, as they can do. But the owners of Michael Collins sued Beam Suntory. It was a $100 million lawsuit. Other brands did the same, and it was settled out of court a few days after the parent company of Michael Collins was itself acquired by a German company. The brand disappeared for a few years, and then Sazerac resurrected it in 2015. They bought the rights to the name, and then they used different stock of whiskey that they had to rebottle, repackage, redesign it, and relaunch this whiskey. So you'll see on the right-hand side, that's the original Michael Collins design and layout. And then on the left, you'll see the most recent iteration of the Michael Collins brand. So it's a Sazerac-owned brand. So now in 2016, you had a case where Sazerac owned Paddy Irish Whiskey and they owned Michael Collins Irish Whiskey. But the story doesn't end there yet. It keeps going and going and going. But before it does, I'm going to have another sip of whiskey. Will you do me a favor while I'm sipping this? Will you click the like button underneath the video? It'll take you 5 seconds and it'll help us get more views. So now, when Paddy was sold in 2016 to Sazerac, there were a lot of questions being asked. What's going to happen to the brand? Is that the end of it in Cork? Is it going to stay in Cork? Is it going to leave Cork? And the word on the street was that Sazerac were knocking on doors of distilleries in Ireland looking for distillery partners to go into business with, or seeing if they could acquire distilleries to be able to take back production of paddy themselves. With a supply agreement, they're obviously dependent on certain pricing. They're dependent on whatever the terms of that supply agreement are. It's more favorable for a brand to have control of the whole process themselves, lest anything should go wrong, as the owners of the Michael Collins brand saw when Beam Suntory bought Cooley and shut off supply, even though there were supply agreements in place. So Sazerac, nobody knew what they were going to do. And there's kind of quietness. Paddy went quiet. In 2021, we started to hear rumblings that maybe there was something that was going to happen in Cork. There was rumours that there was going to be a Paddy brand home built in Cork. And people got excited and thought, that's fantastic. We'd like to see a brand home for Paddy in Cork. And but by 2021, we still hadn't seen anything new out of the brand. It had been 5 years in Sazerac's hands. All we had seen was a rebrand of Paddy into that American kind of cartoonish brand of Paddy's, but nothing else had come out of Sazerac, had come out of Paddy, and so people, I think, were losing a bit of hope in the brand that there would be anything more coming out of it. But the story isn't over yet. Now, at the same time that all this was happening, at the other side of the country, and today's topic is Sligo, Sips, and Sazerac. We've talked about some Sips, we've talked about Sazerac, we haven't talked about Sligo yet, but we're going to talk about Sligo right now. This is a picture of Hazelwood House in the foreground, a 18th century Palladian mansion in Sligo on the banks of Lough Gill, and behind it is a massive, ugly-looking factory that was built for apparel and clothing back in, going back, I think, to the 1970s or 1980s, maybe even earlier. And more recently, it was a factory used for the manufacture of videotapes. It was owned by a South Korean company, and they were making videotapes in this massive factory on the banks of Lough Gill. You don't often see factories in locations like this. But Hazelwood House is the big, beautiful-looking structure at the front. And this is Hazelwood House back in the day. And we're now up in Sligo in Ireland's northwest, and the reason why will become apparent. Hazelwood House was an architectural gem in its day, and of late it was known as the most, almost like an architectural and derelict crime that it was allowed to fall into such disrepair. But that was it in its heyday, and more recently this was Hazelwood House, boarded up, left to rot and kind of in decay. Lots of attempts had been made in Sligo to restore it or to preserve it or to raise awareness of it, and most of those things came to nothing. That was until 2014, though, when David Ratburn bought the entire domain. He bought the factory, he bought Hazelwood House with a goal of restoring it and with installing an Irish whiskey distillery in the factory, and he did. You can see, if you look very closely out the windows, you'll see Hazelwood House, the back of Hazelwood House. So what you're seeing here are the 3 copper pot stills of Lough Gill Distillery. Lough Gill Distillery has been installed in that old factory building. And I'll go back to the other picture where you see, if you look very closely at the front of the factory, you can see the copper pot stills there on the screen. And then if I go forward, you'll see the copper pot stills looking out of the back of Hazelwood House. So it was purchased in 2014. Plans were drawn up for the restoration of the house. Plans were drawn up for the installation of this distillery. And in 2019, December 2019, distillation commenced in Lough Gill Distillery in the home of Hazelwood House, out the back of Hazelwood House. And Lough Gill Distillery is home to the Aharu brand of whiskey. So a sourced range of whiskies, single malts, all single malts, I think, aren't they? So Lough Gill is a single malt distillery, but they have released Aharu whiskies, which some of you, I think, have tried, as their sourced whiskey while they're waiting for their stock to mature. So no whiskey has ever been released from Lough Gill that was distilled themselves. So this was happening all the same time that Sazerac was down buying up Paddy. They were assembling their Irish whiskey brands. And the other side of the country, completely independently, Hazelwood House was changing hands. Lough Gill Distillery was being installed in that old factory building. Here's Sligo up here in the northwest. For those of you who are not familiar where Sligo is, there's Lough Gill Distillery. Lough Gill is a large lake to the east of Sligo town. Not a lot to do in Sligo now, I hate to say. Like it's known more for its scenery. It's known more for its the home of Yeats. W.B. Yeats is buried in the foot of famous mountain Ben Bulben. But there is definitely an interest in Sligo being known for whiskey. Then all of a sudden, in 2022, last year, a new Paddy arrived on scene. A new Paddy. For the first time in the ownership of Sazerac, a new Paddy was released. And this is a blended whiskey called Paddy's Share. And Paddy's Share is a premium blend. So if Paddy Original is just a blend, Paddy's Share is being billed as a premium blend. It is a 47% ABV blend. Again, all three styles. Malt whiskey, pot still whiskey, and grain whiskey. My understanding is that it's lighter on the pot still side, higher in the grain and the malt, and it has a higher percentage of 6-year-old malt than the original blend does. And it is finished for, I think, 4 months in Oloroso sherry casks. So we're going to try that as well. But this came out in March of 2022 to much anticipation. Suddenly we got a new Paddy. Again, all excitement. Is this the future of Paddy? Are we going to see more release from Paddy? So here you see lovely kind of a black bottle, unusual style label. So this came out in March 2022. So we have a little nose of this. So now this one, if the Paddy Original blend is kind of very candied pear, ethanol, kind of alcohol forward on the nose, Paddy's Share will be a little bit more subdued. So a little bit more balance on the nose, not as raw. Still getting some of that pear note, but not as strong. A little bit more caramel, a little bit softer, a little bit more, definitely sweet. Maybe a little bit of green apple note on it. What was I going to say about this one? Oh yeah, there's a little bit of nuttiness there. Now it's maybe a little bit of almond or something. 47% ABV compared to 40% for the Paddy Original. Definitely more of a bite, more texture, that higher ABV coming through. Now this is about a €47 bottle, which would be about a $55, $56 bottle, which is very expensive for a blended whiskey like this. It's it'd be tough to justify this at that price point compared to what's out there at 50 odd euros at the moment. Again, nutty, little hint of malt. I'll have to do a side-by-side between the Paddy Share and the Paddy Original. You can tell there's a little bit more balance to it and a little bit more body, and the length is there. That nutty almondness kind of living on there. I think that's that Oloroso sherry finish, those extra 4 months, that nuttiness is definitely coming through. Jason discovered Irish malts while looking for Paddy's Share. Normally it's the other way around, isn't it? I discovered Paddy's Share while looking for Irish malts. So this came out in March 2022, and so the Paddy story was suddenly front and center in the world of Irish whiskey again. And we thought, well, that's fantastic. What's going to happen next? Well, we didn't have to wait long because the Americans came back again, just like they did in 2016, snapping up Paddy Irish Whiskey. from Irish distillers. Sazerac came back in 2022, July 2022, announcing they were acquiring Lough Gill Distillery, Hazelwood House, and the Aharu whiskey brand, meaning they now had in their portfolio Paddy Irish Whiskey, Aharu Irish Whiskey, Michael Collins Irish Whiskey, and for the first time ever, their very own Irish whiskey distillery. Now, not only did they announce the acquisition of the distillery, they announced big plans to create a brand home for their Irish whiskey brands, a home for Paddy, an Irish whiskey home like they've done in Kentucky and Buffalo Trace, and that style of a brand home. Their goal in Sazerac is to make the northwest of Ireland a mecca for Irish whiskey fans who'll be able to go and sample the brands they're producing at Lough Gill. So I'd imagine in time that the production of Paddy will move in that direction. Now, as we speak right now, there is no column still at Lough Gill Distillery, so grain whiskey, which is the largest component of Paddy share and Paddy, would have to be sourced from elsewhere, perhaps Middleton or Great Northern Distillery. And the pot still, I'm not sure if Lough Gill is producing pot still whiskey, but they would produce the malt component anyway. And the plan is for Hazelwood House to be completely restored. So that would be the brand home itself with the distillery behind it. So there's huge plans that have been shared and teased out with locals in the area, and they're going to be announced more publicly in the next few months, is our understanding as well. So High Spirits Ireland are the distributor of and owned by Sazerac of the brands in Ireland. They're going to share more. We've asked them to come on and talk to us about what's going to happen, and they've promised to do that as soon as they can. But not only did they announce the development of Hazelwood House, but they also announced that they were bringing on former Bushmills master blender Helen Mulholland as the master blender for Sazerac in Ireland, who would be responsible for the vatting, the marrying of the malt in Aharu and of the whiskies that had been produced up there. So Helen, who comes with 30 plus years of experience, Helen was the first woman ever to be inducted into the Whiskey Magazine Hall of Fame in 2018. She is an icon of whiskey many times over, and it's a huge coup for Sazerac to have Helen Mulholland on hand as well. So now we have a situation where Paddy is closer to Sligo than it is to Cork, but the Paddy brand could live on so long as it doesn't get extinguished. But today it sells very well in the United States. It's a profitable brand. I think it made profits of, was it $3.5 or $4 million for the brand last year. So it makes money. It's a low cost brand, but it's also a affordable brand, and it's a low cost brand to produce. So there's money in it, which is the good news. Now, what else is in Sligo? Well, we must give a shout out to the great bar Thomas Connolly's pub in Sligo. Thomas Connolly is a whiskey heaven in the northwest, and so nobody's going to be happier than Thomas Connolly's in Sligo that they are going to be on the doorstep of the resurgence of Irish whiskey in the northwest. They also have in Thomas Connolly's, they have some single casks, 3 different single casks of Aharu whiskey that were casked for Thomas Connolly's. It is a heritage pub. They have a fantastic whiskey selection in there, and it's also home to the Sligo Whiskey Society, which was established in 2021. I encourage you to visit the website thomasconnellysligo.com, and if you're visiting the area, go check out Thomas Connolly. And it is probably the best whiskey bar in the northwest of Ireland by a long shot. Jason Thornton said Connolly's is great. The last time I was in Sligo, I think I was 17 years of age, or 17 years of age, chasing a girl from Sligo, from Cork. I met her in Cork, and I was, this was now, I mean, when I was 17, there was no mobile phones. There was no 17-year-olds driving cars. And I wanted to go see her in Sligo. And we would write letters to each other. Imagine this now, back in, this is 95, 96, I think, 94 maybe. And we were writing letters to each other. And then if I wanted to go see her, I remember the first time I wanted to go see her in Sligo, I went up to the bus station in Cork and I asked for a return ticket. And they said, well, when are you coming back? And I said, well, like today. And they said, you want to go to Sligo today and come back today? And I said, yeah. And they said, you can't do that. They said, it's 9 hours in the bus to get to Sligo. And I said, okay, well, I can't go today. And I remember going home and having to convince my parents that I should be allowed to have an overnight trip to Sligo and come back the next day, because I couldn't go up there in one day and come back the same day. So I was given permission and I went up to Sligo. And that was the last time, I think that might have been the first and the last time I was in Sligo. Those kind of long distance relationships don't tend to work. But that was a different time. So I think I'd like to go back and experience Sligo in a different way, and maybe not take a 9-hour bus journey to get there, and maybe have a decent whiskey when I get there in Thomas Connolly's this time. What else is in Sligo? Well, it's known for its scenery. It's known for its coastal beauty. Yeah, there's a lot. There's Mullaghmore. There's what else is there? Ross's Point. What's the name of this castle? Clykesh, or what? I can't remember the name. What's the name of this castle here? Somebody will find it for me. Also in Sligo, I mean, we grew up in school learning about Sligo. We learned about W.B. Yeats and him being buried in Drumcliff underneath the famous mountain Ben Bulben. And Ben Bulben, a very iconic kind of like Table Mountain looking mountain that dominates the skyline in Sligo. And you can go there and visit Yeats' grave, and you can be moved by his epitaph that scholars have spent quite a while, the last 80 years, arguing over the meaning of it. Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horseman pass by. And the general consensus is that this was Yeats. This is the last line in a poem that Yeats had written about Sligo. And the general consensus is that it was Yeats not taking life so seriously and being at peace with his pending, his death that was looming at some point in the future, and him being okay with it. Cassiebawn, that's it. Cassiebawn Castle, says Jason. All right, let me talk about next week's Shebeen before we go on. Next week's Shebeen, folks, is a big one. It's a fun one. There's going to be guests. We're going to be doing it live. I'm not going to tell you who the guests are, but I will tell you that we're going to be doing it live from JJ Sheehy's pub in Dundalk. It's going to be a great Shebeen. I will share more details of it this coming Friday and not before. And you can guess all you like, but I won't tell you a word. But I'm going to come live from JJ Sheehy's pub in Dundalk, which is owned by Anthony Sheehy and Katie Sheehy from Irish Whiskey Auctions. Many of you know Anthony and Katie, who are our friends and great pals of ours. And they run Irish Whiskey Auctions and send many of you lots of great whiskey packages every month. So that is coming live from JJ Sheehy's next week, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, midnight Irish time. We're going to be in JJ Sheehy's pub. Now, if you're in Ireland, you're not allowed to join us because the doors will be locked because it'll be after hours. But we'll be in there anyway, maybe in Anthony's living room. Who knows? Because Anthony and Katie live there as well. All right, so that's next week. So listen, that's the story of Paddy. This is like the story ends in Sligo. The story ends here at Lough Gill Distillery. Paddy will eventually end up there. Paddy, I'd imagine, will eventually be made here. So a brand that started in the late 1700s has seen its way through amalgamation of 5 different distilleries to create the Cork Distilleries Company, saw its survival through the amalgamation of 3 distilleries to form Irish Distillers in 1966, and now has found itself in the middle of, I would say, the 3rd phase of the whiskey amalgamations that we're about to get into, we're about to see more of. So the 1860s, the height of Irish whiskey production, that was the biggest peak of Irish whiskey outside of today. There's never been a bigger time than today, but that was the previous biggest time. The 1860s, great amalgamation. The 1960s, amalgamation for other reasons, for lack of interest and lack of demand for Irish whiskey. And now 2022, 2023, we're seeing amalgamation, and we'll see more amalgamation because more people want to get into the world of Irish whiskey. So you're going to see brands consolidated. You're going to see distilleries consolidated. You're going to see distilleries bought and sold. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we'll all get to debate and decide and determine over time. But the thing for sure you'll see is that over the coming months and next couple of years, lots of news about this company being bought, this company being sold, this distillery starting, this distillery closing. And it is the cycle of it. It is just the very cycle of Irish whiskey. Strandhill Beach, says Rob, is a great surf beach. Mullaghmore is beautiful, says Jason. Good scenery and great whiskey is a match made in heaven. Yeah, so get yourselves to Sligo. Our next whiskey bus, which will do the Wild Atlantic Way, will not get as far as Sligo, I don't think, because of the time needed to get to all the different places we tried to get to. But we may get there at some point. And I'd certainly love to get there when it's a fully functioning brand home and something new, exciting in the world of Irish whiskey, that a brand like Sazerac, who's got great experience, can lend a fresh eye to the Irish whiskey category, can bring their expertise with the world of whiskey in Kentucky, and can maybe introduce new drinkers to the world of Irish whiskey who are already fans of things that Sazerac do. So that's exciting for all of us, and I think we should celebrate that Paddy still exists. So we will raise a small little glass to Paddy, who, if he knew the roller coaster ride of his whiskey over the years, he'd be spinning in the grave. But he'd be happy, I suppose, because it's still there. Sláinte. Jason says that Sligo has one of the best looking GA jerseys after Cork. There is no public transportation to JJ Sheehy's, Tony, no. In fact, you'll find there's no public transportation to most things in Ireland, sadly. Streedog, Strand, Sligo, 3 ships of the Spanish Armada wrecked in 1588. We're going all the way back to 1588. Woo! Good man, Spalpeen Spánoch. Paddy O'Flaherty. So there you have it now. That's the story of Paddy. So what have we missed? We've shared with you the new Irish whiskies, when you should expect to see Quail's Gate, Garryana, Method and Madness. We've talked about our upcoming events. Dunville's whiskey coming up next this week. We hope to have the links out to you to be able to make your purchases for your allocations that you all requested. 222 bottles snapped up. 300 requests for 222 bottles, which was an amazing response. But everyone will get at least one, which is the good news. And I hope within 3 weeks of that happening, we'll be able to launch, or announce our next collaboration, which will not be that price, I can promise you. It'll be 10 times more. No, it won't. It'll be less than half the price. And we will be bringing to you another special whiskey, something never before released, and something unique and a first. And that's what we try to do, is something interesting, something unique, and something special that we can tell the story of, hang out with interesting people. And the next brand has all of that in spades as well. So I'm looking forward to that release. And as I mentioned, there are 4 whiskies in the pipeline. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so we'll work through them as we can, a month to 6 weeks apart if we can get them. And we will put them all up for sale on our website to our Whiskey Club members. So we'll keep you updated on that. Tony says, I'll have to be his driver in October then. Tony, you'll have some job finding me in October. I'll still be sleeping off the whiskey bus from October, or from August. Some of you mentioning a cruise there. We have teased the idea of a whiskey cruise. The idea that we could all gather for a week-long cruise on a ship where we bring together Irish whiskey makers for talks and even tastings, and we're exploring that. So just know that we're exploring it. And I see some of your comments there. So I worked in the cruise industry for years. We've got lots of great contacts in the cruise industry, and we're exploring some options. One of the biggest revenue streams on a cruise ship is the bar, and where outside of the often cheap cabins, how cruise lines make their money is on the concessions, extra going to a different restaurant, doing activities, but spending money at the bar and buying drinks packages is where they make a lot of money. So we're exploring the realistic chances of us doing anything where whiskey could be brought on in samples, because many cruise ships don't allow you to bring your own spirits on board for the very reason that it's their own revenue stream they're trying to protect. And so oftentimes they insist that if you charter a piece of a ship or all of a ship, you have to buy out the revenue of what they would make on a regular sailing. So we're evaluating all of that and seeing if these are things that could be logistically possible. But we are a long way away, months away from being able to come to any sort of conclusion on that, I suspect. But if we have any information in the meantime, we'll definitely let you know. But just know that our eyes and our dreams are bigger than our abilities in our pockets sometimes, but it doesn't stop us dreaming. So we're going to keep trying to figure out how to bring more people together around Irish whiskey. And I'd like nothing better than to fly makers and producers out from Ireland to Port Canaveral or Galveston or wherever it is, or Fort Lauderdale, and say, right, we're going on a 7-day cruise, who cares where, and we're going to have talks in the morning and dinners in the evening and chance to taste some whiskeys and things like that. So if it's feasible, if it's possible, who's going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. Matt did his own whiskey cruise last year with some green spot and a kayak. It can be done. We can do a whiskey cruise in Ireland too, up the River Shannon, and you can sail right up to Athlone. You can sail up to Sean's Bar and drink some Sean's Bar whiskey. You can sail up to Lough Gill now and get some right up to the distillery door, and maybe roll a barrel from the distillery onto your little cruiser and sail down the Shannon. So whiskey cruises are possible, not always for 500 people or 1,000 people, but 4 people or 8 people on a boat is definitely possible. Definitely possible. So that's it. What have we missed? Next Friday, live Shebeen from JJ Sheehy's pub. And we will have an announcement on that on Friday. And we will have another announcement on Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm not going to say any more, but that's all I'm going to say for now. So next Friday, you'll get word of the next Shebeen, and we will have a little announcement as well on social media. This week, look out for your emails. Keep an eye on social media for the links for Dunville's. You won't most likely get the links before Wednesday, so don't worry if you don't see it tomorrow. We're finalizing some of the challenges associated with these purchases on our side. Are like there's a lot of logistical things to figure out. So in order, and to cut a long story short, some of the logistical details are around currencies and credit card processing, and just there's a significant cost, like a good 5 to 8% of a bottle cost is lost in credit card processing charges, currency conversion fees, even when you've got a good card processor, due to inter-country transactions. And we are buying a whiskey from the United Kingdom, which will be sold and shipped from the Republic of Ireland to the United States. And it creates some logistical challenges that we're working our way through, but we hope to have them solved by tomorrow or Tuesday, and then we'll be able to send you the right links, and then the payment will go where it's meant to go, to the people who make the whiskey and the people who ship the whiskey, and everyone will be happy. So keep an eye out on that. Amy says she'll be on her flight to Ireland during the Shebeen. Does the Shebeen not go out on television on the planes? No? Safe travels to Ireland, Amy and Mick. And yeah, there's lots of things to discuss on next week's Shebeen. That's all I'm going to say. If I keep talking, I'll only give things away. So that's it, folks. That's just a kind of a shorter Shebeen tonight. Shorter, an hour and a half, of which we reversed the audio issues. We normally have them at the end, and now we have them at the start. Maybe next time we'll have no audio issues. Can you imagine? We won't know ourselves. Jason will be at home watching the Shebeen like a good club member. I think you're all going to want to watch the Shebeen on Friday. I think you're all going to be excited, and we're going to have a bit of crack. And I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy it. I'll say no more. I'll say no more. Do me a favor, click the like button if you don't mind, and we'll be back next Friday. And I will be up early in the morning, focused on getting the Dunville's whiskey over the line for the rest of you. On Wednesday, it's going to be labeled. We're going to have some pictures. We're going to be there taking pictures of the labeling at Lough Distillery. We'll get some videos. We'll get some pictures to share with you. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. Really excited to see this in my hands. All up until now, all I've had is wee small bottles like this. But I want to see that big Dunville's bottle and a few of them in my hand, and for our archive, our liquid archive, so that when we eventually have a castle, we can put our whiskies into the castle and they'll be available only in the castle. So stay tuned, and that's it. That's it. Thanks, everybody. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and we will see you all very soon. Shebeen on Sunday. Shebeen on Sunday. Sorry, Mike. Shebeen on Sunday. Why do I keep saying Friday? Announcement on Friday. Shebeen on Sunday. Thank you. Thank you. Shebeen on Sunday. Yeah, same time. The announcement on Friday of the Shebeen on Sunday. That's it. All right. Cheers, everybody. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon. Sláinte.